discussed and detailed at the last post subcommittee meeting, and those comments are all contained in the minutes. And then going forward, one of the things that the subcommittee expressed interest in is also looking at Learning Domain 42, which is Cultural Awareness and Discrimination. And again, these are both Academy courses. Okay, next slide. All right, so next, what we'd like you to do today with respect to this presentation and in summarizing the report that you may or may not have had a chance to review in detail at this point is think about three high-level areas. One is the purpose of POST and the composition of the commission. Two, the accountability and oversight of POST. And three, the review of LD3 and those recommendations. So that's, in a nutshell, what this section of this year's report entails. And so we'd like to ask the subcommittee members to think about recommendations that you might want to vote on today and make as recommendations to the full board in any of these three areas. So bottom line, POST is responsible for setting the minimum standards. It's an incentive-based program, and there's approximately 650 law enforcement agencies that currently voluntarily participate in POST, and we're talking about approximately 95,000 full-time peace officers, reserves, and public safety dispatchers that currently fall in the POST program. And this huge group of sworn officers and dispatch workers are really, they engage with POST literally throughout their entire career. And most of these folks are 30-year career officers. Next slide. So POST has the authority to, one, issue regulations regarding uniform standards and training, and two, set those standards and training at the Basic Academy. POST consists of 18 members. And the interesting thing about that is about 10 of the members must be from sworn law enforcement. In other words, more than half of the commission brings a law enforcement perspective to the commission. And of those 18 members, there are currently 2 public members. And I just quickly looked at the website, and one of the public members is a former fire chief from Oakland and acting manager. And then the other is with the California legislature. So the important work that the commission provides is huge, because in setting those standards, it includes designing and administering training on bias, diversity, and historical perceptions on discrimination and enforcement practices. And the important thing to point out here is that currently there's no requirement currently that a POST member have experience or expertise in civil rights in the context of the criminal justice section, criminal justice system. Okay, next slide. Oversight of POST. There are 2 agencies that we wanted to highlight in the report this year. And again, these are, everything that's in the report is information and discussions that the subcommittee has had in previous meetings. And this has been listed in previous drafts. So the first is the Little Hoover Commission. And this is an independent state agency with the mission to investigate state agency government operations and policies. And this year, because of the highlighted interest in law enforcement training, the Little Hoover Commission decided to do a study on the existing training requirements for California peace officers. So they are in the process of having hearings. They've had a study group, and it's our understanding that they are going to be reducing their study, the outcome of their study, near the end of this year or the early part of next year. So we will continue to monitor that. And this again is highlighted in the report. Okay, next slide. Then we have another aspect of oversight, and again, these are agencies that either by their statutory responsibility in general or their option to look at state operations have decided to focus on post. The California Legislative Analyst's Office is the fiscal arm of the legislature, and they are required every year to review all state agencies' programs with respect to funding and requests that these agencies make to the legislature for funding, or where funding is provided to those agencies via statutory bills that pass. So in 2019, Post received $34.9 million and an augmentation that provided $20 million to be used to focus on use of force and de-escalation. So we wanted to highlight a couple of comments that the legislative analysts made in their report. To basically, they are saying that this is, the funding is significant, and so with significant funding comes significant obligations. And the obligation is that Post, one of their recommendations is that Post report annually on specific outcome and performance measures to the legislature. So this is something that LAO reports directly to the legislature, and the legislature, it's their option to look at these recommendations. Just like the recommendations that the RIPA board makes, the legislature has the prerogative to receive those, consider them, and then make decisions. Okay, next slide. So with that, what I want to do right now is, again, remind you that with respect to the composition of the board, this is something that as you look at as you consider the 18 members, this may be an area that the subcommittee might want to consider expressing thoughts, concerns, or even a recommendation to the legislature about the composition. Because presently, again, there are no civil rights designated people on the Post Commission. And then also, with respect to oversight, well, we mentioned 2 agencies that are looking at Post outside of the statutory responsibility for the commission to report to the governor. There is no known agency specific that provides oversight to Post. So we'd like you to just kind of think about that, mull it over as you continue to hear information about the remaining part of this presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kendall.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to take the board through essentially its own review of LD3. As I mentioned, as we were getting this half of the presentation started, the board so graciously reviewed the LD3 outline. 2 board members were able to attend one of the Academy courses, and then several staff members from RIPA were also able to attend Academy courses as well. But before I go into detail, I kind of wanted to give folks a 1,000-yard overview, if you will, of the courses that the board has reviewed or will be reviewing. So currently we're looking at principled policing in the community. We've begun the review of that. Up next, or something else we're looking at, is LD32, which involves cultural diversity and discrimination, as well as a number of other courses listed here. And in the draft course and the draft content for the report, there is a write-up on all of the ones highlighted that say completed in 2022. So those board comments are also summarized there. With respect to LD3, the board in its last meeting, which I do believe Post was in attendance at, gave a full review of LD3. And we did our best to summarize the board's comments, and so we invite feedback if maybe there are additional comments that we need to incorporate or additional things to be considered when reviewing this course. Overall, it appeared the subcommittee found that the course actually lacked a primary focus on principal policing concepts. Although the course was quite lengthy, only a few pages were actually dedicated to principal policing. Another concern that was consistently expressed was the training emphasizes outdated policing theories, for example, broken windows policing. A third kind of overarching concern that was expressed is it failed to actually incorporate community member perspectives. It was represented to the board that POST does not presently provide a facilitator's guide to instructors. The board expressed concerns with this and that there are no guidelines to ensure the consistency of academy courses. However, through board members attending academy courses, we learned separately that POST may in fact provide additional materials to the academies. And so we're hoping that we can receive all of those materials to give a holistic review of LD3. I think it's important to note here the board's review of LD3 is not a review of each individual academy, but rather the materials that are provided to the academies through POST. So several of the other overarching concerns that were expressed here was despite this course being updated in, I believe it was April of 2020, there was not a lot of discussion of current events. There were also concerns that not only did they not adequately address current events, but they didn't adequately address historical events either. For example, taking some time to update or improve the course in a way that encourages law enforcement agencies to take ownership of the history of policing and contemporary events and how those contribute to community mistrust. Another overarching comment we received from board members was the section on implicit bias would benefit from including concrete examples as well as data that discusses implicit bias and how it influences everyday decisions. And as I go through these again, these are all the comments that were made in the public meeting at our last subcommittee meeting. So none of this should be new content. The next kind of category of information or comments that board members made were that there wasn't enough information addressing alternatives to police interventions, particularly in cases when there's a mental health crisis, and how to interweave that throughout the course, understanding that different communities have different views on, for example, heavy police presence in their neighborhoods. Want to kind of underscore this again because the board expressed some significant concerns with this. The concept of broken windows policing was discussed, and that should be removed from the course, and that those principles are not included throughout the course content, which troublingly, it is interweaved throughout the course content. And then the third kind of bullet point here is the principal policing section isn't really that well developed in terms of the whole course content of LD3. And so it doesn't give the impression to the students that this is actually the primary focus of the course. The last set of comments that we summarized here is, and this is in our vision for future reports as well, the board will continue to review these trainings, which would include LD 42, and also continue the review of LD3. The board, of course, is going to continue to monitor training recommendations made from the course, but as Melanie raised, there is interest in understanding how POST incorporates board feedback, not only for LD3, but for the communications courses or the other courses more broadly that are being reviewed. And also a better understanding of when POST decides not to adopt training recommendations. Another kind of overarching concern was ensuring that the board has enough time to meaningfully review some of the course content and provide feedback as well. And so these are just some of the comments we've summarized from the board's review of LD3, as well as here for our visions for future reports. So we had scheduled an extra long meeting, if you will, to open it up back to the board to discuss anything in additional to LD3 or more broadly how to tackle these different issues in reviewing courses with POST. Aisha had mentioned possible legislative recommendations regarding the composition of the POST Commission. There was also mention of possible increased oversight of POST. That might be something the board would be interested in taking action on. It may be worth waiting until we see what the Little Hoover Commission comes up with. And then thirdly, the board did express wanting to gain a better understanding of how the board's comments will be incorporated. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the board. I feel like DOJ has done a lot of talking, and so I'm going to turn it over to the board for more discussion.
Thank you, Kendall. So I'm just going to open it up for comments from any board members on any part of the presentation.
Thank you for that. I thought it was very, very informative, and I take to heart the suggestion that we think about structure and oversight. I think that's incredibly important. And I had one question, I guess is clarifying. So in reading the summary, it sounds like participation in POST is voluntary, and like I imagine that all of the largest law enforcement agencies are taking their cues and are participants and are actively involved. But is it the case that not every law enforcement agency is? And do we have a sense of how many departments there are that don't take their training cues or sort of participate in POST in California?
That's a great question. This is Aisha. And maybe Megan, if you are on the line, that would be great if you could respond to that question for Professor Raphael.
Absolutely. So there aren't many agencies in California that are not part of the POST program. The ones that do not participate are very small. They are usually a campus police department for community colleges or a district attorney investigators department. There is a list on our website of every department that is part of the POST program, as well as those who are not.
Thank you, Megan. I know, Steve, did you have follow-up comment or question on that?
No, not at the moment. I was dying to know that one, actually.
I did want to pick up on one of the things that was raised, and I can't now remember. I think that was from one of Aisha's initial comments, thinking about the composition of POST. And I just keep coming back to this conversation that we had with one of the POST representatives, was telling me about the story when we were working through some of the refresher courses, how thinking about it, some of the subject matter experts were just debating whether or not to include an example of jaywalking as one of the instances of potentially biased policing. And the subject matter experts, who were all law enforcement, said that's ridiculous, like that no one has ever stopped for jaywalking. And there were some, Wanda's, I could see her nodding her head, some of the participants who were, or just people who were just present there, who were members of POST or worked for POST, but were not subject matter experts, and they were African American, said they had both personally been stopped for jaywalking. And this kind of really demonstrates the need for inclusion of other voices and other perspectives in the training process, and really understanding what policing actually looks like and is experienced like on the streets. And I think kind of two things. One, speaking to Aisha's suggestion of thinking about board composition, I think it would be very useful to include or mandate that, to suggest to the legislature that the composition of post be amended to make sure that it actively includes folks with other perspectives besides just law enforcement. I know that we have a lot of models of that in other spaces in the law, like the RIPA board mandates inclusion of folks with certain backgrounds and experiences. SB2, which just passed on decertification, mandates actually that a post subcommittee that has specific backgrounds, including folks that have been directly impacted by law enforcement or have experience working with police oversight, et cetera, that are from community-based organizations. So I think we may want to suggest to the legislature that they consider amending the composition of posts, whether it's just mandating that certain of the non-law enforcement positions have certain backgrounds or completely rethinking the composition, which right now I think is 10 law enforcement, 8 not mandatory law enforcement. I think that would be a valuable amendment to the way that post is structured and thinking about addressing the work and doing the work they do. And kind of related to that, I think as Post is tapping folks to be subject matter experts in the process of developing this programming that the vast majority of law enforcement officers in the state are taking part in, I think having a more transparent and inclusive process to ensure that there's more participation from different categories of folks with different categories of information and experiences, I think would be also tremendously useful. And I don't know that, I think the former, I can propose that as a motion to include in the RIPA report as a suggestion to the legislature. The latter, suggesting greater transparency and inclusion, may not need to rise to the level of a motion. It's just, it's something they could do it themselves. It doesn't have to be something that the legislature imposes. But I don't know if the DOJ wants to advise on how to move forward with those two suggestions, but those are two that I have, would like to incorporate into the report for next year.
Yeah, I think you're right, Melanie, that anything that you would all want to recommend to the legislature would have to be vote from all of you to then move it to the full board for a vote at the October meeting. But any suggestions that you all would like to make straight to post, generally about the courses, I think could be included. If you'd like to direct us to include it in the report, I think we could do that.
Hey, this is Nancy. I just want to clarify, is that you all, and we're doing some additional work around the advisory board and what sort of like the scope and powers of the RIPA board are to provide you all with more clarity. But you are a state advisory board, and you have the ability to make formal recommendations through the report. And so the report itself gets voted on by the entire board at the end of the year. So anything that you want in the report, the subcommittee can, puts into the report, and then it ultimately is produced as the board's report. If the subcommittee, for example, like today, if you want to vote on making public comment with regard to the AB 846 regulations, you guys would, vote on that here in the subcommittee, and then bring any letter that you worked on to the full board meeting at the next board meeting. And the whole board would then have to vote on whether or not to send the letter on behalf of the board. So the subcommittee is a mechanism through which the board works, but ultimately the whole board has to agree on what the recommendations are.
Thank you both for those clarifications. I think at this point, we still don't have a quorum for voting, or do we have enough folks on the line?
Not right now, no.
Okay. So those are just comments that I had. I don't know if other folks have additional comments or if we want to do public comment and then come back to potentially voting on anything.
May I ask just one clarifying question? Maybe some of the fellow board members know the answer. With regards to Assembly Bill 2, or I can't was it AB2 or SB2, that will actually provide a vehicle for decertification, is that authority being delegated to Post under that legislation, or does that go to DOJ? And the only reason I ask is if we're thinking about representation and oversight, that would be an amazing power for a voluntary organization. I just wonder structurally how Post figures into this particular change.
Would you like me to answer that question? So Post will be the oversight. The investigations belong to the local agencies. Post will have the authority to review those investigations and make recommendations to the advisory board. And the advisory board will then be making recommendations to the commission itself, the Post Commission. And the Post Commission will then, by 2/3 vote, they can recommend to decertify a peace officer. Beyond that, there is an administrative law judge process. It's automatic for those who are recommended for decertification. But to directly answer your question, Post will be responsible for decertification.
And that'll be true for all peace officers in the state, regardless of whether or not their agency is a member of Post.
Actually, no. The penal code is pretty specific as to who it applies to. It applies to those specifically under the Post program. But the way the penal code is written, some peace officers are not under Post authority. So the correctional officers, probation, they have their own certification program and don't go to our academies. So therefore, they're just kind of out of our purview. But it's specifically written in SB2 as to who it applies to.
I might ask a clarification about SB2. Maybe it's not appropriate, but is Post going to create a separate advisory committee to deal with the certification process? Is that my understanding or no?
No, the bill specifically states who is on that advisory board. It'll be written into the penal code as to who can serve on that. The board members will be appointed by the governor and specific stated members of the legislature. The Post has no authority of who is on that board.
Did folks have any other questions for Post or comments on this particular piece? I guess as a follow-up, maybe from the question that I raised kind of before DOJ went into this presentation about incorporating comments for LD3, what is the next step necessary for that? I'm not sure who was the Post representative that was present at that meeting.
I'm the Post representative who's on all of our meetings. I was at that meeting, but I'm with you, Melanie. I'd like a little bit more clear direction as to what the feedback is. I mean, obviously, I was at that meeting. I know what was said. I know what was said today, but it would be nice. I was under the impression we were going to get some sort of written feedback to look at to incorporate. But if there's a different direction that everyone would like us to take, please let me know.
So Megan, I think that the minutes from the last meeting will actually have a very detailed rendition of the board's comments, and Aisha can work with you and get you those and help you with anything else you need.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I also have just a few small comments to the report, but I don't want to hold up public comment. Could I just send DOJ small like line edits, stuff like that? Is that appropriate legally? I can't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
You can send us comments individually. You as an individual can send us comments. So I just want to clarify. So Post will get the minutes, and we are including this level of detail, as you can see in the report for LD3. If you all would like to do anything in addition to that, so Post, that's all public feedback from what you all said at the meeting. If you all would like to do anything more formal, that would be something that you'd have to move on and vote on here in order to move it to the full board. And as of right now, we are trying to get in touch with Edgar, but yes, if you want to move to public comment.
Yeah.
Yes, one question before we do that. So if we decided to go the letter writing route with recommendations, do we have to bring that back to this subcommittee for approval prior to bringing it to the full board?
So I think, and Nancy, please correct me if I'm wrong. So I think what you all could do similarly, if it's mainly following the recommendations that you all have already made, you could move to direct us to write the letter to then bring to the full board, and then have the full board vote on whether you'd like to send that letter like to the Post Commission, for example. So since the contents, unless you all have additional things, but if the contents are what the recommendations you all have already made, you could vote to write a letter, and that letter could be drafted for the full board to vote on by the October meeting.
And Allison, you're 100% correct. And we can, and as Tanya kind of mentioned earlier, you can designate that the DOJ work with the co-chairs to kind of wordsmith the letter and get it in a shape that you all approve of to present to the full board.
Okay. Brandon can't wait, so Can we, let's just move on to public comment to start, and hopefully we'll get Edgar on the line. Do we want to start? So if we can keep public comment to about 2 minutes, give or take. If folks have comments, we'll start in NorCal. Does anyone from NorCal have anything from the public? If no one from NorCal, and if I go past you, feel free to chime in later. Anyone from Central Cal? Anyone from SoCal with comments?
Yes.
Yeah.
I see Mr. Hilton with the hand up. I'm not sure what other voice I heard, but Mr. Hilton, if you'd like to go first, and we can move on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm somewhat braced and encouraged that the board will continue to analyze post-trainings on bias-free policing. Continue. I did not know that Post had trainings on bias-free policing. Perhaps I've been asleep. Perhaps I have not been paying attention. But what I do know is that Post believes there is no such thing as bias-free policing because it has received awards that say so. So, I have yet to learn that Post has forsaken that position. There are some of us who are old enough and have paid attention to this long enough to know and to have seen what Post said What Post said is that the perception of bias is in the minds of the people who make the claim. Perhaps again, I have not been paying attention. I ask you to look. Now, I don't know if any of you have been watching tennis, but I have. And I'm a fan of John McEnroe. And his favorite go-to phrase is, "You cannot be serious." You cannot be serious with any of the things that you have been saying here. This notion that you have no data upon which to make a decision. You have 2.5 years of data, 8 million records, and you have enough to measure outcomes. You cannot be serious. Much of what has been said, I reject because it makes no sense, and it makes no sense to you. It makes no sense because it is not honest, and you know that. Now on the business of social media posts. That one brought a smile to my face because we have an expert on social media posts, the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. He requires, of the 1.4 million stops that they have made since the beginning of REPA, every one of those records should have been a field interview in the database. Only 200,000 of those are there. I'd like to have an accounting for them. Social media post. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hilton. Oops, thank you. I see Ms. Wittig with her hand raised.
Great. Yes, can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Yes, thank you. Great. It's Michelle Wittig from the Santa Monica Coalition for Police Reform. I'd like to comment on the selection and recruitment process. I know it was talked about early on in your meeting. You have two really good sources of expertise, the subject matter experts, people like Jack Glazer and Jack DeVideo and Jennifer Eberhardt, and you have the DOJ and Post professionals whom we've heard from today. But I think there's another potential source of expertise that is often overlooked. And I have to be honest here and say I have a professional interest in this group. These are MA level applied psychologists who are employed in sheriff's departments, police departments, other law enforcement agencies throughout the state and country. They are the ones who are the frontline professionals, the ones who receive the directives from the DOJ and Post, and who actually have a lot of firsthand information as to what aspects of those evaluations, investigations, directives, guidelines, frameworks actually work in the field. Often they have what you might call a 360-degree view. They see the recruitment, they engage with the candidates during selection. They often are privy to information about later discipline and termination. So it's those people who are the target of the directives that often can provide, I think, constructive feedback. So maybe if not this year, then next year, I would try to incorporate the feedback from those professionals who are working in the field and using these instruments that are developed. I do congratulate the group on its measured approach, its tentative conclusions. You know, most of us really want certainty in the area of human behavior, and it's just not possible. So the better view is to think of these instruments that we have as probabilistically valid, not completely valid, and to be humble about the use of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any other individuals that wanted to make a public comment? If that is all the public comment, do we have a quorum yet or still do not? I don't know that I see.
So unfortunately, we do not. He is in a briefing for a shooting and can't get out. So our proposal is to schedule another very short meeting for you all because you all have to vote on these things before they can go to the full board October 20th. So we can schedule like a 30-minute meeting for all of you where you can all just vote, and make sure we allow a few minutes for public comment, but you can all just vote, have the vote, and that's it. No presentations, no nothing. And we need 10 days to notice it. We can even, if you all have a date of availability now, we can look at the calendars now if you all would like to, while everyone's here, like in 2 weeks. But I think what would be helpful too is for all, at least the group of you can't take a formal vote, but for some direction for DOJ, whether you'd all lean towards, writing a public comment letter on the regulations, since the deadline for that is in October, and also whether you do have an interest in a formal letter for post. So it might be helpful just to have a very short discussion, even though you all can't take a vote, to see if there's at least consensus among all of you to then vote at the next meeting, if that all makes sense. Just so we don't lose 2 to 3 weeks of time before actually start researching and drafting what you all would like.
I think that's a good idea. So do you want to do maybe a straw poll first to see if that letter sounds like a good idea, period, and then specific points that we might want to raise for, I guess, whatever the motion would be next time, if we had that? Or else maybe, I don't know if reverse is the better way, but...
And it's the two different, it's the AB 846 and then LD3, so the two different things.
Well, I'm supportive of a letter, of working on it, thinking about the content. And I guess Melanie and Brendan, you would be working on it together. Sorry.
I think, and I'm hoping this is correct, DOJ would take the laboring oar on it, and we would, based on the kind of points we identify in this discussion or the voting discussion next time, and then we could wordsmith or give feedback in advance of the full board meeting.
Brendan will not have to write the letter himself in the next 2 weeks. Yes, DOJ will take the laboring work. But that's why it would be helpful, so we don't lose 2 weeks, to just get a sense of the points you might be interested in, and then you can all vote on them, and we can refine the letter based on your vote.
So I think thank you. I think what was initially raised by Tanya of the 2 points on, actually, Tanya, do you want to just restate them kind of succinctly so that we know that we're all on the same page? And then the one thing that I would propose adding was something explicitly on incorporation of social media review.
Sure. So I have the incorporation of social media explicitly within the body of the proposed regulations. And then the two that Tony and I were thinking of were requiring the investigator to make findings with respect to each targeted construct. And I don't need to go into an example of that. And evaluate findings with respect to each construct, and the sources they looked into in assessing a person's attitudes, behaviors, traits, and attributes, whether there is direct evidence of biased behavior, and if that evidence is weak or ambiguous, what factors do the psychologists weigh in determining a person's biases?
And I don't know if this happened to everyone or just me, but there was a little bit of time when I couldn't understand what you were saying. So I heard the first thing was factual findings regarding each construct from the investigator. And then can you say the second again?
So the second piece is with the evaluator, requiring them to spell out their
Tanya,
findings
sorry.
with respect to each construct.
Tanya, sorry, you.
So I'm
cut
gonna
out again.
I'm gonna put it in the chat. How about I do that?
Thank you. And then I'm sorry, Allison, what was the LD3 piece
Oh,
that we needed
the
to
prince.
decide?
Sorry, that principal policing course. Whether you all would be interested in making your final recommendations, in making the recommendations that you all discussed into a letter, into a more formal letter. They'll go into the report. They went into the minutes, but whether you all would like to do something else with them.
We need to, I'm sorry, I think we need to get the full board to report for public comment. Is that correct?
Well, because they were your review, it will go into the report already, because it was all of your review of the course. So it will be in the report and will be part of the report that the full board votes on. Whether you'd like to present something formally, like to the post commission, for example, that would be, that would be another potential step, or something else that you all can think of that you would like to do. But it will go into the report that the whole board votes on already.
So for that piece, I think to me that's probably sufficient, since the rest of the board also won't have the chance to have looked at LD3. We're the only ones that actually did. I think, and there's no kind of formal mechanism that a more formal letter would require posts to do anything different than our comments to them, unless there is, which Allison, you can tell me if that would trigger any different kind of response necessarily from post, or it's just kind of still their evaluation of how valuable the comments are either way.
Post can probably speak to that better than I can. I don't know if a letter to the commission has any different weight or, results in any different actions. So I think Post might be able to speak to that better than I can in terms of how their mechanisms for feedback and so on.
Yeah, really the best thing would be to submit something to us for the commission, and it would be presented to them, and really ultimately it's up to them as to what action they want to provide to us, or direction they want to provide to staff.
I would want to add, Melanie, if I could, that part of the RIPA board's charge is to make recommendations to posts in its annual reports. And so I'm hoping, and I'm assuming that the commission does read the RIPA board report. And so, to Melanie, to your point, I guess if Megan is saying it's better to do it in a letter, perhaps it is, but part of the statutory mandate to the RIPA board is to provide recommendation to post on the area of racial identity profiling.
And just to piggyback on that as well, Nancy's correct. I think it's the February commission meeting. I do present the report. They are provided it, and then they're asked for any direction based on those recommendations given in the report.
I knew I remembered that from last year, Megan. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if we include our comments in sufficient detail in the report, they'll be considered, and like that is voted on by the full board, they'll be considered the same as if it was an external letter with the same kind of information.
It's basically a discussion item, and we ask them to basically do what they wish with those recommendations. It's ultimately up to them. I guess it would be up to you guys if you wanted to emphasize any of those recommendations beyond what the report states.
And then I guess the only other item that I would want to do we just save it for the next time, but the potential voting to include as a suggestion to legislature to amend the composition. That could just totally wait until we have our next follow-up meeting.
Yes, because that would require a vote since it's a recommendation to the legislature. So it would require a vote for all of you to move it to the full board for a vote.
Okay.
So we can.
I'll say if possible, with the 2 minutes, could we do tentative dates for folks that are on the call currently? For a short 30-minute or less.
Melody, I would love to get your dates, but we are still a lot of DOJ folk that we need to coordinate with as well. And so I think I would appreciate if we could just do it after the meeting.
Okay.
We will all try to contact you today. I'm also sending Post your emails today so they can send you the link for the supervisor's course. And so we will we'll work out a doodle poll for you all today for a short meeting. We'll get those to you. So it sounds like, and Tanya put what she and Tony had talked about in the chat. So it sounds like, with the understanding that DOJ might start just developing the contents. So it sounds like you will all be interested in a vote on the legislature and then a vote on whether whether you'd all like to write a public comment letter on the regulations for AB 846. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you. So is that all? Should we adjourn the meeting, or is there any last item?
No, I think that's it. And please, if you all are able to respond to the poll ASAP, we do need 10 days to notice it. So we could potentially notice it tomorrow. So we'll try to get dates out to you today, and then the faster everyone responds, the faster we can get the meeting set and get you all voting on this. So we appreciate all of you dedicating your time as well. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. I'll see you at the next meeting.